When you ride the train at Disneyland in Anaheim, you're up on a berm. Okay. That's actual ground level for the city of Anaheim. The
That's
park
weird.
gradually slopes down into a bowl. Now, this is important in the hypothesis of Caesarea and myself and mine because the energy drawn up by the carousel draws up, disperses, and what we think happens is it goes out to the berm and then it comes back in. And basically, the energy it pulls up stays contained within Disneyland.
Welcome back to the Jupiter podcast. I'm your host, Tom Franklin, and today we have on the wonderful Mr. Walter Bosley, and we're going to get into some stuff about Disneyland. I don't know. I don't know much about. I know there's some weird stuff. Walt Disney has connections with some nefarious type situations and special privileges afforded to him by the Florida government. I don't quite understand all that, but I'm sure Mr. Walter Bosley will get into that for us. So a little bit of house cleaning. Thank you all very much for liking and subscribing to the channel. If you keep finding yourself coming back here and you haven't subscribed yet, do me a favor, do so. Sooner or later, I'll be going to be going over to Rumble, so I can do some more, cetaceous, like more in-depth stuff, things I really want to talk about. And I got myself, 635 subs, and I'm on my way to 1,000. Blah 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 blah. Thank you all for being along with the trip with me. And without further ado, welcome to the Eye of Jupiter podcast, Mr. Walter Bosley.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me here. I'm looking forward to talking with you and your audience.
Yes, my small but very devout audience. I don't
There you
get
go.
many views, but the views I get, they watch the whole thing, and that's been. I think
That's important. Yeah, that's when you're getting the full, attention span there. That's important.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey so far. I mean, the people who, like I said, they really like me, and I think you and I are going to have a wonderful conversation. So, Walter, please do us a favor. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and promote whatever you like, and tell us where we can find you.
Well, I started having weird experiences when I was a kid, but that didn't stop me from going into a career of 20 years in the U.S. national security community, multiple agencies. I commissioned officer in the Air Force Reserve,
Wow, okay.
inactive since coming off active duty. And I was a federal agent, special agent of the Air Force OSI, and went around the world after that doing counterterrorism type stuff. And I started a publishing company primarily for pulp adventure fiction back in 2002. But I left my government career. I left the traveling part of it, the full-time part of it in 06, and decided to really focus on nonfiction for a while with my publishing. And so now my publishing company is going on 22 years this October, and multiple books, several of which are behind me. I started I started pulling my nonfiction writer's thread um, with this book that we're going to talk about today.
All
And
right.
stuff that I found in here led to the stuff that then continued to show up in all the rest of my nonfiction books. And what's interesting about that, significant about that, is when you look at the nonfiction stuff I've written, superficially, it looks like there's, several not connected topics. But the weird thing is, they all have the same few threads running through them, whether it's UFOs, whether it's breakaway civilizations, whether it's occult murder, whether it's, explorers, exploring the Americas and around the world and stuff like that. There have been these common threads running through all my nonfiction. So for years now, I've been following that trail and just really focusing on trying to figure out just what's going on with this stuff that I do. And been on TV a few times, Travel Channel, History Channel. Guy has had me on a couple of their shows, and yeah, so I've just been kind of out there for years exploring these mysteries.
Wow. And so you started this. What was the catalyst in you saying, you know what, I don't want to do nonfiction no more. I want to do fiction no more. I want to do nonfiction. What was it that like caught your attention, like in particular?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I still like writing fiction, and that was my first love, was writing fiction, and I will continue to do that. But what happened was, back in 1981, I'd had a very curious experience at Disneyland that over the years proved as more was revealed, um, it proved that it was a very significant and strange experience that I had had, and it stuck with me. And as I said, I had started having weird experiences as a teenager, and through the years even before I started working for Uncle Sam, and all the way through the years working for Uncle Sam, and especially then. So my own strange experiences had me interested in certain things. And as I stated before, when I started pulling some threads in my research, one thing led to another. And that's how my nonfiction books happened, was a genuine and sincere, desire to see, okay, what the heck is this information that turned up in the previous book? What is this all about? And so,
that must be very satisfying to see that, like, your curiosities of what it is that you enjoy about
sure. Yeah.
life, and when you pull on said threads, that they're connecting to something that you've either heard or have experienced or have done some type of research into it, and you're
Yeah.
just like, okay, so I'm going to keep. Apparently, I'm on the right track.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so it was the pursuit of trying to answer the questions and all that. And so I decided, well, you know what? Writing about it is a good way to document, what I found. Now, my books, very little of what I've written is about me. I only have one book that you would consider autobiographical, and it's one of the shortest books I've written. I'll mention my experiences, of course, in Latitude 33, but in a
Okay.
couple of the others. So it really was a desire to write about these things that I've stumbled onto. And while doing that, it brought to me and exposed me to, the phenomena that surround the things I was looking into. And
Wow.
because I don't want to say addictive, but it is kind of addictive, all these experiences, you don't want to stop. You just keep pursuing this stuff and pulling those threads. And the next thing you know, you have, a bunch of books. So,
Yeah, I always love the fact that people can, like, whatever it is that you want to do in life. You want to be the best shoe shiner, you want to be an actor, whatever it is that it is in your life. If you
hmm
follow or pursue that is what you love, that
hmm
for me is much more satisfying than someone saying, I have a house in Beverly Hills, but I hate what I do. And
right,
I just love that. You know what I mean? So, all
right.
right. Walter, what thread are we going to pull on today? I mean, what are we going to talk about?
Well, since I'm new to your audience, I should probably, on my Latitude 33 Key to the Kingdom book, this is the one that was inspired by the experience that I'm going to share with you.
Okay.
Um, I kind of did a basic look, deep dive at the idea of the book, and that is, as the subtitle says, the arcane science and hermetic engineering of the happiest place on earth. Because my experience, as I said, over the years, things were revealed to me, and I realized, wait a minute, there's something going on with the engineering of this very interesting and very famous place. So I wrote that book just to kind of get the basic idea and the research I did on the background of Disneyland and what I found between the historical influences on the design and the themes of the place, up to the very man who was hired to engineer the physical Disneyland for Walt and his brother Roy. Now, over the years, other things that I've researched and written about have really enlightened me and expanded my understanding of the things I was, a greater understanding of the things I wrote about in the book.
Okay.
So I'm presently taking another deep dive into this so that perhaps I can, expand upon what I've already presented in that. So and I'm finding some very interesting things. But essentially, 1981, I'm a high school student, a senior, because I graduated that spring, and it was in the best I can remember is February. I'm pretty sure it was in February. Back then, in the old days, um, you could still just decide, hey, let's go to Disneyland and walk up to the gate and get your ticket and go in. Now you have to have a reservation and all this ridiculous stuff, and it's way more expensive. So my friends and I, being Southern Californians, you go to Disneyland all the time, or you used to be able to. Now, again, it's too prohibitive. It's cost prohibitive. But we would go, whenever we wanted to. So we probably had like a couple of days off from school or something. I remember it was a Wednesday night, is my best recollection. So going in the middle of a week like that. So we go and we're having fun. I'm with a handful of friends, and in the 9 o'clock hour, I remember p.m. After 9 that evening, myself and a couple others are riding the carousel, and as we're going around, I see this old man wearing a black suit, white shirt, no tie, but he's got close cropped snow white hair and a nicely trimmed, neatly trimmed snow white beard. And I put him at around 70 years old, was my guess. So as we go around, I see him standing there. Now, if you're familiar with the geography of Disneyland, there's the carousel in Fantasyland. There's the flying Dumbo ride, which is a spin ride. And there's Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And there's this walkway in between them that will, if you follow it, takes you to the back of the Matterhorn and where the teacup ride is. Okay. This factors in a moment. So we're going around the carousel. I'm seeing this old man. He's standing there just watching the carousel go around. Finally, we come around and he's not there. I'm like, oh, okay. So we get off the ride and we take that path that I just described, heading back towards the back of the Matterhorn. And there's the old man sitting on a bench by himself. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to approach him, speak to him, and found out his name was Alfred. This was his first time at Disneyland. This guy was just amazed at the place. You would have thought he'd never heard of Disneyland. So this was in the days when they still had the A through E ticket books, but they were starting the passport ticket, where if you bought the passport, Disneyland passport, that was the only ticket you needed. You got unlimited, rides on any of the rides. It's just the one ticket. That's what they've been doing for years now. But back then, this was a big deal. So my friends and I, we had those passport tickets. And instead of messing them up and taking them in and out of our pockets, we had all gotten in the habit of buying a character pin and pinning it to our shirt or our coat or something. So as we approach the ride, it's there, right? You get the idea. So this
Mhm.
factors in a moment. Um, so he only has like one ticket left or something like that. And he does want to go ride It's a Small World. We said, okay, let's take him over to the ride, and I don't know why I was compelled to do this, but went over to It's a Small World. We rode the ride with him. He was just like in wonder, just in awe. Now we're riding Small World, and by that time, everybody kind of jokes about Small World and
Yeah.
mocks it. But he was like a child in a candy store, like, oh my gosh. And when we got off the ride, um, we go walking back towards where we met up with him, and I don't know why, just goodness of my heart, I was a Boy Scout and all that crap. I said, I thought, you know what? I come to Disneyland a lot. This is this guy's first and probably only trip. So I took my passport ticket off and pinned it onto his coat. And I said, let me give you my passport ticket. The park's open for another hour and a half or so. With this ticket, you can go ride anything you want as many times as you want. You would have thought that I had given him a pot of gold, the most valuable thing. He was so grateful, just so. And I'm like, yeah, hey, don't worry about it. I live here. We come here all the time. So off he goes, back into Fantasyland, and off we go. My friends, they tease me. Oh, what a nice guy, Mr. Generous. Shut up. So I don't think much of it at that time. Well, in 1982, by the way, they redid Fantasyland and they moved some things, and one of them was the carousel, and they moved the carousel 30 feet, about 30 feet off of its original position. Later, that becomes important too. So over the years, I remember, the interesting old guy I met at Disneyland. 1992, zip ahead, I'm working for the FBI in Manhattan. And by this time, I'm really into researching and reading about all the weird stuff, and just curious as hell about UFO, paranormal, time, the whole thing.
Right.
1992, I'm in Manhattan. I go to the Coliseum bookstore. I don't know if it's still there or not, at Columbus Circle. And I'm in the weird paranormal section. And there's this book called The Old Straight Track. And it's about ley line research and stuff, right? And I had
Okay.
known a little bit about ley lines at that time. So I'm looking at this book. I'm going, okay, it's this book published in 1928 by, Alfred Watkins. Okay. So I'm looking at the book, and there's a picture of Alfred Watkins. And when I see that picture, I'm stunned. I get
Mhm.
goosebumps because I'm looking at the man I met
Oh
at
my God.
Disneyland in 1981. And the problem is he died in 1935. But it was him that I'm looking at the man, and he said his name was Alfred. And what's weird is I cannot to this day remember his voice. I remember
Oh
talking
my
to him,
God.
but I can't remember his voice to tell you what's it, a British accent or whatever. And that was the beginning of the what was this? Who was this guy? What exactly
Maybe
did
like
I
a time
experience at
slip.
Disneyland?
Maybe a
Yeah,
time
something
slip or
like
something.
that. So,
Yeah.
uh, uh, years later, um, I'm friends with Greg Bishop, if you're familiar with Greg Bishop. And in 2006, I'd been sitting in on his show as kind of an unofficial co-host fairly regularly, and we were wondering why the private club, the exclusive membership only club, Club 33 at Disneyland, was called Club 33. We didn't know. So on air, we're doing his show Radio Mysterio. So we get on the computer, and it's like, oh, okay. It's interesting. Disneyland is located at the 33rd degree latitude. Huh. They say that Club 33, one of the stories was that it was named that because there were 33 corporate sponsors. But
Mm.
the park is located on 33.8118, I think it is. or 1881, whatever. It's ones and eights, but it's at 33. And, you know, already by this time, you know, where everyone's aware of the funny things go on at that latitudinal spot there, that band around the, oops, sorry, I keep hitting the thing there. I'm using the hands. So I decided, okay, I've got to dig into this. And when I did, that's what resulted in this book, because I learned about the man who engineered physical Disneyland and what he was into, who his associates were. Um, what really jumped at me was the man who engineered Disneyland. His name was C.V. Wood, Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood. He was a consultant at SRI, the organization that, yes, was involved with the creation, the development and advance of scientific remote viewing and other weird technology.
Oh my God. You're like a Project
And
Looking Glass, stuff like that?
that kind of stuff. And the Disneys, it had been recommended that they go to SRI to get, you know, consulting on, you know, locations to build the park and engineering and, you know, common stuff like the economics of it, the, you know, what the money flow, what the population flow and all that. But Wood was hired to consult on the engineering part of it, the actual physical building of the park. And he loved the idea so much that he resigned from SRI and uh, uh, went to work full time for Walt and Roy as the engineer of physical Disneyland. So I thought, okay. What I was already armed with was I had told a close associate, a guy named Seshari, who does geomorphological analysis with topographical maps to identify gravity concentrations where telluric currents run through the terrain, the physical terrain, right? Sorry, this headphone is driving me nuts here. And he had identified an intersection of three telluric currents, or what we in error call ley lines, three telluric currents intersecting on the property of Disneyland in the park. And it's in Fantasyland. And when I did some initial research on this, I found out that it was basically where the carousel used to sit until 1982 was right on top of that intersection of the telluric current ley lines. Okay. So
That's crazy.
we already had the idea of a rotating, spinning device on top of an intersection of energy lines, right, that are connected to the grid of the Earth, hypothetically, theoretically. And the idea is that it draws up the energy and disperses it through the park. Now, I'll get to more of that in a moment, but I knew this. I had been told this about this telluric current intersection. So I look at this CV Wood guy closer and I realize, wait a minute, he's the one that told the Disneys to buy that property. They were thinking of somewhere in LA near Hollywood. They were thinking out here where I'm at in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino Valley. They were thinking multiple places. He's the one that said, no, you need to buy this 160 acres of citrus property in Anaheim because it's going to be a future center of population, blah, blah, blah. But C.V. Wood was into psychic phenomena
Right.
before he ever met the Disneys, before he got on this project. If anyone at SRI knew about telluric current and any weirdness involved with it, he would be one of them, definitely. So here he is picking the site of Disneyland and engineering physical Disneyland. So he's the guy that would have decided exactly where the carousel went. And I argue in the book that, and have argued for a long time, is that he's the one that knew that that intersection of the three telluric currents was there. And he's the one that designed the carousel to sit right on top of it. So then the question is, why? Well, that goes back to what I said about the hypothesis that the carousel was the main cog, if you will, or the main part in what makes Disneyland, the whole park, a psychotronic device. And the idea is the
Wow.
carousel sits there and spins. The rotation draws up the energy from the intersection, okay, of three lines. It's going to be stronger than just one line. It draws it up, and then at the same time, it spreads it out
Disperses.
through,
Yes.
yes, through the park. Now, get this. Disneyland is built in a bowl. What they did was they dug a
Oh my
bowl.
God.
It's shaped like an upside down triangle or pyramid
They
when you
dug
look
it.
at north.
They
Pardon?
dug. They dug it
Oh
extra.
yeah, yeah. Disneyland, and there's a berm when you ride the train at Disneyland in Anaheim. You're up on a berm. Okay, that's actual ground level for the city of Anaheim. The
That's
park
weird.
gradually slopes down into a bowl. Now, this is important in the hypothesis of Sechery and myself and mine because the energy drawn up by the carousel draws up, disperses, and what we think happens is it goes out to the berm and then it comes back in. And basically, the energy it pulls up stays contained within Disneyland. Now, I'm a graybeard. I've been going to Disneyland since 1967. I was a little kid, and I can tell you that yes, even when I was getting close to being adulthood there in high school and stuff, you could go to Disneyland and forget about the outside world. You could forget that Anaheim was there. Even as an adult, you would just forget that Anaheim exists. You're in Disneyland. You're in the world of this amusement park, and
The happiest
and
place on
you,
earth. Yes.
yeah, it was just and so I began to wonder. I wonder if this effect of this energy is contributory to that. If that's a causal kind of effect there. And over the years, as we got farther and farther away from 1982, when the carousel was moved off that intersection, Disneyland started to decline in its energy, the type, experience you'd have there, and quite frankly, in the quality of the maintenance of the place. Now, when I went in 2009 was the last time I went, I was appalled at the grime that you would see like on trash cans and on rails. That, let me tell you, they used to steam clean the pathways and streets in Disneyland every night. Okay. Um, and you would never see grime or on a trash can. Or, I mean, if somebody spilled something, somebody would come along and it would be gone. Okay. Trash where people just don't put stuff in the trash cans and it lays there. That's just, an example of indicative of what I think was the the result of this energy no longer being drawn up and spread throughout the park. So psychotronic,
Wow.
the psychotronic aspect of it, when which I think it was operational from 1955 when it opened until 1982 when they moved the carousel. So through 1981. Um, this was when Disneyland, in my opinion, was this psychotronic device where it could not just contribute to being in a good mood while you're in the park and just being into the magic of it, but also kind of unlocking keys in your psyche and maybe perhaps as I discuss in the book, this book here, um, maybe open portals
Or maybe like
and who knows what would
affecting,
come through.
and maybe somehow affecting the collective unconsciousness.
That
You
too,
know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's
So
that's incredible, dude. That's incredible. So you think that this carousel action is creating like a vortex, creating a vortex where these energy lines meets. This goes out, comes up, and feeds
yeah,
itself back
draws
into the
up,
part.
draws up, spreads it out, and
It's such an incredible. It's pretty cool, man.
well, then when I go into this in this book, I analyze things that are in the park, particularly Fantasyland, and I there's all sorts of hermetic symbolism in the park, including the four treasures of the Tuatha De Danann, which are the original hermetic source of the basic suits in a deck of playing cards. And there's all sorts of alchemical symbolism that is there in Fantasyland. And it's wild. It's wild, including on the carousel itself. There are these shields, okay, on the canopy that is around it and that covers it, and they have keys, the double key symbol, which,
Yeah.
you know, there are mundane explanations for that. But what's interesting is, um, I mentioned before that in all my nonfiction works, there are a couple of threads that run through all of them, even when especially when I'm not expecting it, they're there. Okay. Those two threads are, as I mentioned, the Tuatha De Danann a moment ago. Okay. They are an interesting topic in themselves, but the Tuatha De Danann, who essentially are interdimensionals, they're from the fairy world and stuff.
Fairies.
And yeah, the goddess Hecate. Hecate is the guardian of the Triple Crossroad. Okay, in the afterlife, when you die and go into the afterlife, she is the guardian of the gates to the underworld, the goddess of the Triple Crossroad, the
according
Triple
to according
Crossroad.
to which belief system? Which one?
Greek
Which one is
mythology,
Greek mythology?
but she's chthonic. See, she predates Greek. She predates ancient Egypt, who's predates the Greek. Her origin is kind of murky. That's how far back she goes. And there are
Okay.
aspects of her in Egyptian mythology, as in like the goddess Isis has aspects of Hecate. The goddess
Oh wow.
Athena has
Older
aspects
than
of
ISIS.
Hecate.
That's very
Yeah.
old. Okay.
And so, you know, so there she is, the goddess of the Triple Crossroad, Three Roads Crossing. Well, there I have in Disneyland the intersection of three telluric currents or ley lines.
Wow.
So does Hecate have something to do with what's going on with this carousel at Disneyland? Well, her symbol, her main symbol, is a wheel. And what is a carousel but a
A wheel.
spinning wheel? So there we have Triple Crossroad, spinning wheel. We have crows perched overlooking the carousel. The crow, the raven, is her one of her most well-known familiars. Okay, and uh, you know, there she is, you know, connected in all the symbology, and also the Tuatha De Danann. Well, another of her symbols is she holds the
Oh my God.
keys to the places in the underworld. And what's on the carousel, as I said?
The
Keys.
keys. Right.
Right.
Is
So
Walter
and there's
is
a lot more.
I imagine
Mhm.
just a question because I don't know. I've never been to Disneyland in California, but I did go to
Mhm.
Disneyland in Paris. Are
Oh.
they set out the same? Because I went there in 2004, 20 years ago.
Um
Are they the same set? Because I went through all of that one.
the various Disneyland parks have their differences, and that's on
Okay.
purpose. So they're not exactly alike. And
Like the
honestly, I have
original.
not done a deep dive on the other parks. I think I've generally looked at them and haven't found that they uh, one or two of them might be within that band of see, the whole band of the weird latitude actually
Yeah.
is between 30 and 40 latitude. 33 degrees you have some
Is it?
particular things,
Mm-hmm.
but because there's latitude 37 stuff that's very weird that goes on, but it's between 30 and 40 north. Okay. And so other than maybe taking a basic look at the other parks where they land in that, and some of them don't, most of them don't, I've really only done the deep dive in
Into the one in
Disneyland.
California. Hmm.
Yeah, and that because that's where I had my personal experience
Right.
also. So yeah, so it was when I realized, wait a minute, there's no way this guy CV Wood didn't know all this stuff, and there's no
Right.
way that he didn't engineer this into the park. Now, um, people like to jump to, see, I told you everything Disney was evil. Walt Disney was this evil sorcerer who was trying to do nefarious things to children. And here's the thing: I've done the research. Okay. Um, Walt Disney was not. I'm going to say this. I've said it a million times. I continue to say it. It's in the book. Walt Disney was not a Freemason. Okay.
Okay.
That is a popular but untrue belief that people insist upon. I have people get mad at me when I say that. I'm like, tough, do the investigation, the researcher stuff. He wasn't.
Uh, but
In
I've
high
also heard
school,
that
he was in DeMolay, which was like a just a
Demolay, I know who Demolay is,
yeah,
which
and
is
they
part of
are a
the Knights
Masonic
Templar.
organization.
Yeah,
But
the Knights
Walt
Templar group.
never went beyond that level. When he got out of high school, um, I think when he got out of high school, he went right into the war as an ambulance driver.
Wasn't
But
he?
he never became a Freemason.
I don't know if this is true or not because I haven't done the research, but maybe you can. Wasn't he a well-known anti-Semite? Is this true, or is there any weight to
No,
that? No. Okay.
not that I have found. When you hear those
Okay.
stories and you go to look for the sources, it's always somebody's apocryphal tale
Okay.
or something,
Right.
or it's an interpretation of. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those that excuses everybody because, oh, it was the times. Because look, way back in the 1860s, people knew that slavery was wrong. So don't tell me that it was the times of the day to have that attitude. But that said, yeah, I mean, a lot of people would be insensitive making jokes or offhand comments, but without consciously being anti this or that. Because
That's
to an extent, there was kind of an etiquette of the day, wrong as it may have been on, some levels and with some things. Um, he definitely did not like unions because
okay.
unions, that's a whole other discussion we
That's a
could
whole
have.
nother podcast. Yeah.
Look, I was an FBI counterintelligence guy, and I personally have seen in the closed files, okay, the FBI files dating back to the like 1929 and through the 1930s, and I know personally the history of American labor unions and their big expansion under the influence of Soviet agents. That's a fact.
Wow.
That's true. That's one of the things that they would look when they would send their agents out. Okay, they would target certain professions, law. The ideal
Yeah.
become lawyers. Okay, so you can
Hmm.
manipulate the law.
Like every president.
Academia, become teachers, college professors, so you can influence the young.
Oh my
Okay,
god. Oh,
and
dude, you're killing it.
journalists. And Dzerzhinsky was the guy that was the first spy master for the new Soviet Union after the Bolshevik Revolution. And this was part of his plan: send out our agents to become lawyers, professors and teachers, journalists, okay, and and stir up labor union activity in the West, okay, to help screw with the capitalists. Okay, so
Yeah.
there was serious Soviet influence agent involvement involved with labor unions. Okay, so what am I saying? The way they would go about things was aimed not to make things better for these influence agents. What they would push policies and unions not to necessarily make it better for workers. Of course, there was that involved too, and it did, to an extent. But the idea was to just keep pushing, pushing, pushing until you affected the profit margin, until you hurt that corporation. Okay. And these were the tactics that were part of why the labor unions did what they did. And, some of these a-hole tactics, were pulled on Disney. So yeah, he wasn't happy with them because for the time, okay, his employees actually got a pretty good deal. They were, well taken care of, and so forth. He saw it as kind of a betrayal. Okay. So
Okay.
yeah, labor unions he wasn't too happy with. The anti-Semitism thing was not
It's not okay.
it was not the thing that people, make it out to be. Um,
So there's nothing.
and he was not a Freemason and he was not a
So there's nothing like
sorcerer
where you
occultist.
can. I'm sorry. sorry, Walter. There's nothing where you could like point at and say this guy was anything spectacular other than being a good businessman, or how was he able to get in touch
Well,
with this gentleman from the intelligence agency who became his instructor? Like how?
no,
What
no.
was
They remember SRI. SRI was
SRI?
was a consulting firm. So look, Walt was the creative genius and the great idea guy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Roy, his brother, was the businessman,
Okay,
and
all right.
so Roy, I think it was Roy that had asked around and looked into it and said, "We need to talk to this consulting firm, this SRI." And one of the other guys they consulted was just a pure economic feasibility numbers math guy, right? He didn't care about the hocus pocus. He was like, oh yeah, here's if you build it here, this, that, and the other, blah blah blah. Very practical stuff. But yeah, it was. I think it was Roy, and they just went there, to consult these guys. And Wood, I'm guessing that he already knew, or he was charmed by Walt's idea of Disneyland, and he subsequently did research, did some geomorphological research, or maybe already knew it and thought, "Oh, this will be a good fit," because he was one of the co-founders of an organization. This is C.V. Wood. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Organization called the Mind Science Foundation. And he was good friends with a guy, a philanthropist back in the day named Tom Swift. And Tom Swift was known as a guy who financed expeditions to go find the Yeti, the abominable snowman. And
Okay.
Swift was also very much into psychic phenomena and things like that. And he had the money. So he and C.V. Wood and a couple of others founded the Mind Science Foundation. So they were into this stuff. They were into what would be psychotronic influence and things like that. Walt, he just wanted, to build his park. Okay, that's
Okay.
truly what he was about. Walt Disney, he was a chain smoker. He liked his whiskey, he liked to drink, and he cussed like a sailor. But, uh, and he didn't like unions, whatever, but he wasn't this evil occult genius guy that
Okay.
people just insist that he was, and that's in ignorance. That's listening to rumors
I'm
and,
I'm being
you know,
enlightened right now,
yeah.
Walter. I'm being enlightened by this whole situation. You hear certain things about certain things, and I'm a busy man.
Yeah,
I'm a contractor. You know.
yeah, so it's my opinion too, as I've looked into this and looked into CV Wood, that Wood, CV Wood himself, he didn't do this to, MK Ultra people and control children and turn them into slaves and all this stuff. Um, I really think the man was doing this as an experiment in enhancing the experience of people attending the park. I really
Wow.
do. I am convinced that he did this for positive reasons. Don't get me wrong. I even talk about it in the book. Years after Walt died and that company started changing, by the time you get to the 1990s, it ain't the Disney of Walt Disney. It's not that original, well-meaning Disneyland and Disney Corporation,
Became
as we
something
all
else.
know.
Yes.
Yeah, there was sexual subliminal stuff in Disney
Oh yeah.
animation in the early '90s. We've all seen the stuff in The Lion King and Little
Oh yeah.
Mermaid, and then the weird thing about the
Yeah.
the pedophiles that have been arrested, the Disney yeah, all that happened long after Walt Disney was dead, and he had nothing to do with it, you know. So yeah, the modern nefarious aspect of Disney, I'm right on board with you, right on board. But Walt himself, nah,
All
he was
right.
just a regular human being with flaws. But it's C.V. Wood who really created this idea of a park as a psychotronic device, and I think it really worked up until I think it's disengaged. When they moved the carousel, they
Okay.
disengaged it, whether wittingly or unwittingly. I couldn't tell you, but I do think that it has something to do with the experience I had there with this Alfred guy. That's a lot. I just threw a lot at you.
Has there been other? Has there been other? Yeah, you're killing it, Walter. Like there's so many things, like, people have their certain box of things that they've either heard or studied or researched themselves, and then you come in from this part, because that's the great part about doing these shows, is I get to run into people who've done research or have personal accounts about these kind of things, and
Yeah.
like that you can remember the names is blowing me away. Oh yeah, this is Thomas Swift. Like what? That's so crazy to me. Um, has there been any other occurrences where people have run into people from the past in the park? Have you heard of any of these encounters, maybe?
The only other, here's the interesting thing. There is a chapter on ghosts that have been reported because people die at Disneyland. You don't hear about it, and that's on purpose. That's by design.
Of
Most of the
course.
time, the park, the company has an arrangement with the city. And most of the time, when someone dies, what they do is they try to get them out through their back alleys, right, into an ambulance, and they're transported to Anaheim General Hospital, Anaheim General or Community or whatever it is, and whatever it is now, I don't know. They're transported to the local hospital, and they're declared dead at the hospital so
Hospital.
that Disneyland can reduce the number of people who've died in the park. Now,
Right. The
sometimes
fun.
that's unavoidable, like the guy who I think got half his skull knocked off by standing up on a roller coaster like an idiot.
Wasn't there somebody
But
who got eaten by an alligator, or a young child eaten
no,
by an
there's
alligator? That was
no,
in
there's
Disney
never been
World.
any real. There's no real animals like that at Disneyland. But an employee was trapped in the what used to be the Carousel of Progress, turned into America Sings. It's in Tomorrowland. It's a big giant building that spins around, or it used to. I don't know if it still does. And the employee was standing in a certain spot, and the rotation, as it rotated around, the wall came and pinned her and crushed her to death.
Ugh.
So that's one employee death. There were two kids. One of them, they jumped into the river there, the water, because they wanted to go to Tom Sawyer's Island and stay all night in the park. And one of them, they were two brothers. One of them drowned there
Oh
in the
wow.
river. There's a woman who spread the ashes of her deceased child in Pirates of the Caribbean. Um, anyway,
That's
people have
so.
reported
That's
ghosts.
crazy.
Yeah, people have reported, employees and others have reported ghosts in Pirates of the Caribbean, might be that kid, a ghost inside the Matterhorn. Let's see, I think ghosts around Tom Sawyer's Island. So there are weird paranormal things associated with the park. But as far as seeing through time and people, Philip K. Dick was
That name
known
rings a
to
bell,
be
but I don't. Oh, who is that?
PKD, Blade Runner, through a glass darkly. Oh shoot,
Blade
I'm
Runner.
sure
Okay.
I'm doing a complete brain dump, except on Blade Runner, which is based on his novel "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep." Valus, if you're familiar with Valus, the
Sorry.
vast intelligence. Anyway, I'm acquainted with his ex-wife Tessa, who could tell you greater details about this. But Philip K. Dick, he had a fascination with Disneyland during the time that he was seeing visions and glimpses of ancient Rome, where he lived in Fullerton, which is near Anaheim and stuff. But he had a fascination with Disneyland that I want to learn much more about. Um, and just my experience. So
Well,
uh,
so,
now
so just
I have seen stories where this couple, they one of them had a photo of when they were kid. They didn't meet till they were in their 20s, but one of them has a photo in the family photo album when they were both kids, and the other one, I think the girl is in the background when she was a little kid, and they didn't know each other, and then years later they meet and get married and discovered, so for what that's
yeah,
worth, I don't,
that
that's
can
kind of a weird
that's
thing.
yeah, it can happen. But I just think it's so interesting. So you have this experience. You're in the park in '81, about to
Hmm.
graduate high school. You run into this
Hmm.
gentleman who was just amazed. You give him your pass to go to the whole park,
Yeah.
and then years later you run into this book and it runs you. This is I don't know if it's the catalyst for you into your which this book that you've written, I think is what you said.
It
But it
took some
just
years to get there, but yeah,
oh
14
yes,
years later, I decided to write the book. But that was the big seed that was planted in my head. Like, wait a minute, did I see Alfred Watkins, a man who died in 1935 at Disneyland in 1981? What the heck's you know going on here?
yeah,
And that was just kind of in the background, and finally in 2006 when I see that Disneyland's on the 33rd, I'm like, okay, I got to look into this. Now here's a funny thing. CV Wood died around the time I saw the Watkins book in 92.
okay,
So CV Wood, the man who I knew nothing about in 92, who I would learn about 14, 15 years later,
hmm
died around that time. I think even the same month. For all I know, it could have been the same day that I walk into that store in Manhattan and see the Watkins book. So yeah,
so good.
that's
So
a taste.
the 33, but the 33 also comes up in Freemasons, the highest level of
Oh yeah.
Freemasonry.
Oh yeah.
That's not that can't be by coincidence.
Um, right. And I do think of course, you're going to find some of the things in Masonry, in the mix because Masonry itself is esoteric, right?
Yes.
Um, it's aspects of it, or obviously, it's based on the esoteric. So there's going to be some overlap, of course, but Walt himself, and I don't recall if Wood was a Mason. Now, remember, I wrote this book in 2007. And now I'm revisiting the research because, as I said earlier, there are things that I've learned researching other stuff, things I understand better.
That came back.
And so I'm going
Right.
back to revisit all this. And I'm in the middle of that now, so I can
Oh wow.
expand on what I found.
Thanks so much, man. I think that was incredible. Is there any other books in the future that you're going to be coming out with, or any other books in your catalog that you'd like to promote right now?
Um, well, always the my Empire of the Wheel books. That's a trilogy of them. This is the first one. This is being developed to be a dramatic TV series.
There you go, dude.
So this one's in development to be a TV series, um, and I'll push another one because it has its connections. This one here, I Will See You in Time, is a time travel novel that I wrote in 2010, and much of what I learned for this book, I use dramatically in this book.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think even a certain little bit of the Alfred encounter is in the time travel book. So, and these can
And
be
you can
found
find
at the
Amazon.
website there
Yeah.
under my name,
Oh, you're good, man.
lostconantlibrary.com and
LostCountyLibrary.com. Do you
walterbosley.com.
have any? Do you have any social media you want to push out there, buddy?
I sure do. I have a live stream myself every week, twice a week, actually, on Wednesday afternoons at the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube. And on the same channel, I'm co host with Malia Grimm, who is kind of a paranormal researcher. And
Okay.
we work together on this publishing stuff. And I kind of co-host with her on a Saturday live stream. And so, yeah, people can check it out. And I mentioned, of course, lostconantlibrary.com and walterbosley.com. So that should be enough.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I was just basically sitting here with my mouth open the whole time. I hope you don't mind. It's kind
No
of
problem at all.
that was a
Mine's
lot.
been
That was
running.
it was just heavy. That's a lot. It's a lot of information to get in. And I was just thinking, like, what do I ask you? And like every time I'm about to ask you a question, you have this great way because you are a storyteller of sorts. This is what you do. You are building your narrative to get to where you're going. And I was like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing, so I'll just
Well,
be quiet.
throw out a couple of questions so that I can. Are there one or two that are
No,
just
no,
burning
you kind of
questions?
covered all of them. I was just thinking,
Okay,
the 33, the Freemasons. I'm going to have you back on again to talk about something else. I mean, whatever it is that you
absolutely,
like, maybe something where we can both kind of ask questions towards each other or something because you are
sure.
so well versed in what you know. And
Okay.
this has been a fantastic conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I love
Thank you
talking
for
about
having.
this
Thank
stuff.
you. Stay in the green room for a second, dude,
Sure.
and then we'll make sure that everything is uploaded and all that good stuff. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Walter. Well, that was Walter Bosley, and apparently at the beginning of the episode, I got Disney World mixed up with Disneyland. Welcome to the Eye of Jupiter. You know how time gets down sometimes. I want to thank you all very much for joining. Uh, remember to like, share, and subscribe and all that. And remember, we are the Eye, and we are aware. Love you all.
You have been listening to the Eye of Jupiter podcast. Remember, if you have any strange occurrences or stories or anything you'd like to share, please drop me an email at theeyeofjupiterpodcast@gmail.com and you'll be on the show. And remember, we are the Eye and we are aware. Thank you.